Georgia football fans, you waited a long, long time to be the best. Now you were the best running on 3 consecutive years. Maybe you make it happen here in 2023. We are taking the UGA deep dive. We got Tony Altamore, our friend, consultant, strategist, right here at the Voice of College Football, and certainly appreciate Tony's work as we are taking deep dives across the platforms of the Voice of College Football. And Georgia is next. Tony, how you doing tonight?
Glory, glory to old Georgia. Doing well, thanks.
Appreciate you being here. And if you're not familiar, once again, everyone, just sit down and enjoy, because Tony's going to take us through various metrics that really give a foundation of knowledge and information for all of us to understand each one of these schools in regards to their culture, their history, their academic standing, where they're headed. We also, of course, bring in the athletics and first and foremost football. And Georgia, you are in good standing across the board. So you should be proud of yourselves and proud of your school and your athletics. And of course, the football, we already knew that. So this is really good. And keep in mind, we've already done USC, Florida State. We've done
Miami, Notre Dame.
Miami as well. And Notre Dame, of course, with the AAU status being achieved by Miami and Notre Dame here recently. All right, Tony, I will leave it up to you and certainly follow along, and I'm ready to learn along with everyone else.
Well, go Dogs. And let's dive in, guys. So Georgia is an awesome, awesome school. So we're gonna look at Georgia today in a couple of frames. First, one of the interesting things, by the way, about Georgia, I don't know if you guys know this. Georgia's actually one of the first schools founded in the new United States. So there were 9, I think, colonial colleges, which were chartered under His Majesty the King. And then Georgia's one of the oldest schools in the country so newest schools after independence, which is pretty cool. Though it's also land grant school. So we're going to dig into Georgia tonight on 4 fronts. The first one is the university. So we're going to look at the university itself. We're going to look at its academics. We're going to look at its athletics. And then we're going to dive into football. Now, this is a series we're doing with Mark and the Voice of College Football channel on our Voice of College Football universe here in the community. So these are the schools that actually have channels here in the Voice of College Football community. Now, somebody sent me some screenshots, I guess, of another conference, another school who's not in here was, I guess, quite upset that they are not included. That this is the Voice of College Football community, guys. I don't personally decide it. And it's based on Mark's whole broader community. So it's not a slight if your school's not one of them.
It's your fault, Tony.
It's my, well, believe me, there are some people who think that it is.
Folks,
but anyways,
we'd love to have 133 channels, so we are expanding.
Someday,
but we want to do it in a wise way, folks. So
yeah, someday you'll have 133 channels. But anyway, in the meantime, we just have this, and this is kind of a neat group of schools. So we're going to be comparing Georgia here to this group of schools in the Voice College Football universe. I see Larry. Larry, we don't have a Utah channel yet. We need to get one. Once we start a Utah channel, there'll be a Utah. And it was not Utah fans who were mad. It was another school. But yeah, so we're doing the comparisons here of this group, and you'll see some interesting things. So just kind of interesting things. So some data that just came out today, and then we'll kind of get into the university piece. We were wondering, does money buy championships? So we just got some new financial data, and we just got the new end of the year all sports performance data. And Georgia had a really, really, really good year. One of the top athletic programs in the country this year, not just in football, but across the board. So you'll see Georgia, this is the Directors Cup points. And you'll see Georgia just absolutely rocking it out this year. And certainly giving themselves the resources to do so. So we'll get more into that money in a minute. Like I said before, Georgia's a land grant school, although one of the few that was actually older than the land grant school. So that'll be kind of interesting to see. But And another aspect of Georgia, which I just want to point out, Georgia is one of only, 9 schools that actually paid back last year extra profits to the school. Now, there's a lot of ways that subsidies go back and forth, and the school gives student fees, and the athletic department pays tuition. So there's a lot of money going back and forth, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But Georgia gets a special piece of my salute anyway, because they're one of only 9 schools that actually, sent money back to Central Campus. Almost nobody else does that. That's pretty cool. But a little bit of controversy in the last couple weeks here with Georgia. And that is that if you had talked to betting folks about who were going to be the next AAU schools, a lot of people would have told you Georgia. And South Florida, UC Riverside, Notre Dame, and Miami were some surprises to a lot of people over Georgia. So hopefully for Georgia's sake, maybe in the next decade or so, it would be awesome to see Georgia in the AAU. They're a flagship school, phenomenal school, world-class institution, and hopefully worthy of that honor coming up soon. This was a list from the New America Foundation, I don't know, 7 years ago or something, where they broke down who they thought should sort of be like the next AAU schools or were worthy of AAU. Georgia was their number 4 of schools that were not in AAU. That's now number 3. So keep your eye out on Georgia from the AAU standpoint. All right, so let's take a look at, we sort of looked at this a little kind of a different version, but one of the charts that we really like here to sort of show, to get an understanding of the schools, is to look at a combination of sports success and academic success. So on this chart that we're going to show, we do these for each of them. We see Truck Stop Gumby. Truck Stop Gumby, your chancellor job is open. That's going to be really interesting. Anyway, so going up and down is sports success, and going side to side is academic rank. So you want to be up and to the right. That's like the best place. That means you're a great school with an elite athletic department. And this is based on a 3-way average that we use of the 3 most popular academic ranks, limited to FBS and AAU schools. And then we use the last 2 years Director's Cup points. I think you guys had a really good spring. We made these a couple months ago. So your spring, you're getting a little bit shorted. Sorry, guys. You just saw you guys had a great spring this year. So I think you're just up a little higher from the actual end of this year. But what we saw is there's really 3 groups here. The first one is the Power 5 schools, which are mid to great academics and mid to great sports. And you guys are, I would say you're great in both. Then we have kind of the elite Ivies and the service academies, a little weaker in sports, but super elite academics. And then the G5, which can be mid to weaker academics, and they're weaker sports. And it's wild, guys, to see how little overlap there really is. So when we think about the G5, and you guys, of course, Georgia is as elite as it comes in the SEC, you really see that difference, and the difference that money, that investment, and that commitment really makes, and what it delivers for you guys. So this is, you can see here, this is the Power 5 versus the G5. You see where Georgia is up, one of the best athletically, and also really, really successful academically. Here they are all labeled. So if you're on a screen, you can see a little better. You guys are kind of in a cluster here, a little cluster of Georgia, Florida State, North Carolina State, and Arizona State. So again, 4 really great schools. And as we go through here we are. This is just the Power 5. And one of the things that you'll see, a lot of the statistics that we'll look at here, I think the SEC is sort of in 2 groups academically. You'll see this in a lot of data. On one side is Texas, Texas A&M, Florida, and Vanderbilt. And then there's Georgia in the middle, and then everybody else behind you. You'll see this in a lot of statistics. And so it's actually, it's kind of an interesting place. And it's, again, why people think Georgia is an elite school that would be very worthy of AAU status. I mean, you're surrounded there by either AAU schools or the other ones that everybody thinks are major candidates. And again, you sit at that edge right on the edge of almost everyone to the right of you is AAU. Most of the people to the left are not. So you're kind of right on that edge there at UGA. And why does this matter? Well, this is just kind of a little piece of context here. Not sure if you guys know this, but there's about 6,200 schools of higher learning, about 2,200 or so that we would sort of think of colleges, about 1,200 that we would sort of think as the major ones. So of those 6,200 schools of higher learning, 9 conferences with 111% of these schools, so 2%, do 73% of all the academic research in this country. It's wild. And these numbers are big, and they dwarf numbers in sports. So that's why we talk about this a lot. So, for example, you take a look at the SEC. The SEC does $6 billion a year in government research. Like, that's a massive number. It dwarfs what you do in sports. So that, again, just sort of gives a little bit of context as to why we talk a lot about this stuff, because it's big dollars. So let's look at UGA as a school. So Georgia, of course, is a public school. It's a land grant school, not an AAU school. Now, one of the things that you do hear a lot is the Carnegie number, which is you'll hear usually hear R1, R2, R3. There's also M1, M2, M3. There's B. There's special focus, but the main ones are R, which means it's a big research school. And R1 is the highest designation. So that means it means highest amount of research being done at that school. And one of the things that's pretty impressive here about this Voice of College Football universe of schools here is that every one of them is an R1 school. These are all great schools. They are all rated by Carnegie as absolutely the highest that they go. So, I mean, so even when you see somebody and you're like, oh, they're red, they're not as good, they're still really, really high. So looking here at Georgia, let's just go down just the chart a little bit. So your core budget, 1.6 million or 1.6 billion. I'm sorry. So kind of in the middle. You spend about 40,000 a student, which is not a lot. But you're not doing quite as much big research money as other people, so that's fine. Georgia is kind of, again, very sort of in the middle of this group, as in a lot of these numbers. And like we said, there's a lot of areas Georgia's kind of in the middle of. So you have 30,000 students, 30,000 undergrads out of 40,000 students, which is 75% undergrad, which is a lot. USC is only 42. You guys are 75. You have, again, a lot of stuff kind of mid-range here. 39%. 39,000. I'm sorry, I'm looking at this number wrong. My screen is bad. 43,000 applicants, and of 39,000 applicants at a 40% admissions rate. Sorry, guys, I'm having trouble seeing this thing here. So your 40% admissions rate is one of the more elite among these groups. So of these schools, a lot of them have 75, 71, 85% admissions rates. You guys at Georgia are only a 40% admissions rate, which is really pretty selective. One of the other neat things about your school is that you have a really affordable. So Georgia in-state tuition is only about $28,000. Out-of-state tuition is $47,000, but the average student is only paying $17,000. So it's pretty affordable as far as these schools go. Mark, any surprises?
I was going to ask you if, and I can imagine the answer is going to be a loaded one just because it depends, but are there any of these categories on there that you feel are of the utmost importance or the strongest indicators of success?
Admissions rate, because that's it's one of those things. If you think about almost like you compete for recruits, what's your recruit rating? The big thing for schools is what's your admissions rate? So, how many more people want to go there than can get in? Now, different schools have different missions. So, for example, some of these schools are in states where they don't have, like you guys have a huge network of public schools in the state of Georgia. All very good schools, but you have kind of places for students that are maybe not like the most competitive applicants to be able to also go to school. And some of these states don't have that. So their school kind of like doubles in that role. You guys are more of the traditional flagship school, so you have a more selective admissions rate. But that as far as these numbers go, that's one of those that really sort of stands out. The other thing for some of these schools, and these are all the blue blood schools, but for other schools, having a huge school with a lot of students means that your school has a big budget, and so there's more resources to throw at sports. I'll give you. Well, let's pick on TCU for example. Total props to TCU. TCU is running a massive, like, mega school athletic program at a school that really belongs like in the Patriot League. I mean, TCU is a great school, but it's tiny. So they have to pump enormous amounts of money into the athletic department to run a huge school. But take a look also, in Georgia, let's look at Kennesaw State. So Kennesaw State is doing some awesome things to build themselves up and be ready to move up into CUSA. But Kennesaw State is a huge school, and so they have a little more resources to be able to do that. You guys, kind of in the middle, but certainly resources are not a problem for Georgia.
These institutions, especially on this scale, are so massive. Progress takes time, of course, and especially progress against the field because everybody else is progressing typically as well. Without, putting you on the spot too much, who on this chart do you think has made the most progress over the last couple decades academically?
Not to be a homer, but actually probably USC. They were number 55, I think, in 1990, and they've been up to number 23 academically. So, I think, what are they, 26 now or something? So USC would be one of them. Alabama has done fantastic stuff to rock it up. Michigan has pushed its way up. Miami, for Miami, if you said Miami was going to the AAU, like, people would not have believed you. Florida State's another one. Florida State in the 80s was not a very elite school of any stretch of the imagination. And if you said to somebody in the 80s that Florida State was mad because they should have been chosen for the AAU and they're, academic on the level of Miami closing into Florida, people would have laughed. And so that's, it's pretty wild to see the amazing growth that Florida State has done. A lot of these schools are really, really doing great stuff, and then and others continue to really serve their mission. West Virginia has done great stuff. They're not, but West Virginia is not trying to claw their numbers up, because one of the things about a state like Georgia, a state like Florida, a state like California, is you have this whole network of other schools that are supporting the mission of really sort of educating the masses, and the flagship school can just run with it. And Florida has done amazing stuff with that, with USF and Florida State and Miami doing amazing stuff. Central Florida building up, all West Florida, Florida Gulf Coast, all those are great schools. Georgia, you've got great, and whoever's running your board of regents, they do a great job. Because look at what's happening at Kennesaw State, look what's happening at Georgia State, look what's happening at Georgia Southern. All of these are really ascendant schools, and they're serving a growing population and a changing population. So anyway, I give huge credit to everything about UGA.
I kind of liken that to what's happened with Clemson football. They made it a concerted, focused effort around the time that they elevated Dabo Swinney to be a football power. They actually stated, we're on a mission to become a football power. And so to make the kind of progress you're talking about with some of these schools, just throwing money at it takes money, but not just money, throwing money at progress. And obviously it starts at the top. You have to have amazing leadership What typically do those leaders pinpoint? Is it increasing the quality of the faculty? What are some of those key points to seeing that kind of surge academically?
So this sounds really cheesy, but to most of those leaders, they want to get better at everything. So they look at it and they say, we need better faculty, we need better students, we need better facilities, we need better sports, we need better branding. And then they think all of those things really just like it's like they go in and mix and they turbocharge to each other. So, you get better students and you raise up in the rankings, and then you can get better faculty, you need better facilities for them. And then, you want your sports because that helps your branding and your marketing, and all that stuff really kind of synthesizes together. And when a school is on a roll, it's on a roll. Houston is a great example of that. The stuff that Tillman Fertitta, who's the chairman of their board, and President Couture, who's their president, have done are just amazing. Like Houston is doing awesome stuff. And you see the same stuff with Alabama. There's a joke, you hear a lot. People will say, some people in education worry that Nick Saban is the most popular person in higher education in Alabama. The deans of the University of Alabama are just fine with that because it has elevated the image of the University of Alabama. Georgia's always been a great school. Georgia and Georgia Tech are both elite, great schools that kind of fill a little different roles for their state. Georgia and Georgia Tech are a lot like Indiana and Purdue are, I would say, as far as the relationship between the two schools and kind of their focus areas. And so you really want to get to be great at all of those things. And if we take a look at where Georgia is, the SEC is an interesting conference because some of the SEC schools are a little bit lower ranked, but they are flagship schools. So do you guys know what flagship schools are? It's usually like the University of blank. And it's where they have the law school, it's where they have the med school, it's where the judges went and the governors went and the state senators all went and the zillionaire who owns all the car dealerships and the funeral homes went. And it's really the nexus of power of a state. And they're usually tied also to the branding of the state, right? So like if you're from Georgia, you're usually a Georgia fan. And it's a tremendous advantage. And one of the great things about the SEC is it is full of state flagship schools. The land grants and the state flagship schools, the SEC and the Big Ten own that space. And so that just gives you all sorts of inherent advantages as a school, right? You have the med schools, you have the big research money, the governors all went there. They give you the money that you need. You have a lot of advantages being a flagship school like Georgia is. And so sometimes when you look at it and you say, oh, look at, they're not as high as this, they're not as high as this, they're not as high as that. It's kind of okay in the SEC because they are all big flagship schools. And so like with Clemson, for example, people will say, oh, well, Clemson, the ACC, which is a phenomenal conference, has elite schools, but not as many of the big flagship schools as the SEC does. And we're going to dig into these numbers more in just a minute, specifically on Georgia, so we can kind of skip that. So we look at your academics?
Absolutely.
All right. So Georgia, really good school. You are a flagship school on there. So when we did we created here for the Voice College football community, we've taken a look at that three-way average ranking. You guys are number 69. So that's really good. We mentioned you have a 40% admissions rate. You're number 49 with US News. You're number 96 with Shanghai. You're 143 with Wall Street Journal. Remember, those are all out of different things. That's why we put that 3 ranking figure there together. Your faculty were a little bit lower at 122. So your faculty, and we'll give you some better breakouts of this. That might be an area that the school could do a little more focus on. You do about $500 million a year in research, which is good. it's not, there's a lot of bigger ones here, but it's still certainly pretty good. You have a $1.9 billion endowment, which is pretty solid. The endowment sort of like the school's like retirement. It's like a 401k for your school, that you get the interest off of, that lets the school operate. The great thing about an endowment, having a big endowment, is it means there's investment income money that you have just as a resource to just help the school. So that it helps you be more financially independent from the state, particularly if you have a state that has funding troubles. Now, one of the great things, of course, about Georgia is that your regents and your state and your school are a little more behind you guys. So, it helps to have the state aligned. And of course, when you're the flagship school, it really helps because when you need the state's help, they're more likely to get it. Fundraising. So this is a couple years old. Your fundraising was a little low. They only had 143 million. One of the numbers you guys do great at, Rhodes Scholars. So you guys have had 24 Rhodes Scholars, which is really good. There's a social mobility ranking that Washington Monthly does that we really like here. And that's about, sort of, are you taking kids from different backgrounds and helping them succeed in life? And it's, measured against like expected graduation rates, by income, things like that. Georgia's really good. They're ranked 127 in that, which is really good. And one of the numbers here that's one of the highest in the Voice College football community world is you have about an 88% graduation rate for your students. So I think that's really impressive for a big state public school. That's especially good. And again, you guys are right at that edge, right between those really kind of elite big public schools like Florida and Texas, and then everybody else. So you're certainly really good at numbers, I think, for Georgia. Mark, any surprises?
Well, besides a comment from Nick about Kirby Smart's haircut, I don't see anything in the chat, but certainly, folks, leave your comments and questions regarding what we are discussing here. Nothing really strikes me as out of the ordinary. Of course, I've seen this chart a number of times. Don't see anything here with Georgia. Again, it seems to be the theme across the board thus far is I don't want to call it neutrality, but being in a good place amongst elite universities.
Yeah, and kudos to them on everything for Georgia. So again, really, these are all really good numbers, guys. Georgia's a great school. So let's kind of look at where you guys compare here to other people. So we talked about that 3-way average academic rankings. I got to change the headline. Sorry, that was for the other one we did. I was frantically getting this ready, guys. My bad. But you see that, like, right there you are. You guys are right in the middle of the SEC there. Again, Texas A&M, Florida, Vanderbilt on one side. Gap, you guys, Gap, everybody else. So again, great school. We don't really need to talk, Mark. We don't need to talk about Georgia's realignment credibility, do we?
I don't believe so. I will say that I'm a bit.
By the way, Georgia, if you want to realign, I think your metrics are great. Anybody would love to have you.
Yeah, I think they could pick and choose and go wherever they want. Yes, I think that I doubt if that's high on the priority list, but I will say that I am a bit surprised where Texas A&M stands in the SEC.
Oh yeah, Texas A&M's a great school. Texas A&M's an AAU school. They're, the problem with Texas A&M is that they sit there in the shadow of Texas, just hating life. Because Texas A&M is an awesome school, but Texas is just a little bit brighter and sparklier. Which overshines on them a little bit. But yeah, Georgia's a great school. Taking a look again, admissions rate, same thing. Although Texas A&M's a little easier to get into than you guys. But again, same thing. You have Vanderbilt, Texas, and Florida. Gap, you guys, Gap, everybody else. But take a look at your admissions rate. I mean, it's higher than all but one of the Big 12. Your admissions rate is better than the only schools in the Pac-12 with better admissions rate than you guys are Cal and Stanford. You're better than most of the Big 10. I mean, Georgia's a great school. It's hard to get in. So, I think I've made Texas A&M mad. All right, let's take a look. Like we said, your faculty, a little bit lower, and this is stuff like faculty that are in national academies, major like awards, like science awards and stuff like that go to faculty. Some things like that Washington Monthly puts in this faculty accolades rating. So I mean, I'm not sure why you guys are a little further down. It may have to do with a little bit with all the science stuff that goes on at Georgia Tech. It's not as much of a priority. Given your rankings everywhere else, it doesn't. I don't think it's a cause for stress or concern. So this is looking at research spend. So like we said, you guys do about $500 million in research spend, which puts you at 5th in the SEC. So really good. Texas A&M number 1, Florida number 2, Vanderbilt 3, Texas 4. Although Texas and Cal are their own like weird messes because they have huge systems that are kind of all linked together. But yeah, really good for Georgia right there. And really good for the SEC. So this is including locally adjacent med schools. So SEC is at $7 billion. I mean, the SEC is equivalent to the Ivy League. Yeah, granted they have twice as many schools, but the SEC schools are major schools. Like I mentioned that about the importance of flagship schools. The SEC schools are major schools that matter. And you sort of see that, I think, in these numbers.
Has there been much movement among these conferences or these particular schools in recent years?
No, these numbers are hard to move. I mean, yes, schools push to move them, and everybody moves up, right? Because the government invests more in research and inflation and all that. But to really move your status, your level between them, is hard and takes a while. Because it's multi-year grants, and it really takes investment in faculty. So what you do is you go out and steal the faculty that win the huge grants. I would guess Georgia's a little bit handicapped too. Again, I'm forgive me, guys. I don't know, the Rumble Seat guys would know this better than I do. But I would think that because of all the science stuff at Georgia Tech, they're filling a little bit of that role. Alabama, for example, if you look, Alabama's really low, but look at UAB in the American with just a giant number, right? So they're doing a lot. UAB is doing all the research that is for Alabama. So I think you have a little bit of that with Georgia and Georgia Tech. So this is research ranking. Again, like we said, there you are right in the middle again. You got the little cluster over on the side, Gap, Georgia, everybody else. But compared to other conferences, you'd be middle of the ACC, kind of bottom third of the pack, towards the end of the Big Ten, but you'd be number 2 in the Big 12. Although, again, none of that really matters because Georgia's not looking at realignment. We talked about your fundraising. Your real average in the SEC of fundraising, I think you guys are about $150 million. Average SEC schools raising about $160 million. Not as important given the huge revenues of your sports. But certainly the kind of thing that you always want to have up there. So let's look at athletic department. That's why you guys are here.
Tony, before we move on there, maybe I'm going to state the obvious, but you could probably give better context to this. It's almost like an athletic coach or leader in a particular program. When there is a change, whether it was because that particular coach decided to move on or he was terminated from his job, that looking at those key leadership positions at a university, chancellor positions, president, and so forth, the board analyzing where they stand amongst many things that you presented us, and probably even more to a granular place to say either we love where we are and where we're headed. Now let's find someone who fits our model and what we do well, or we want a change in direction, or we want to improve in a certain path or area. Let's go get somebody who fits that background and can show us the way to increase performance in a certain area.
Yeah, and they'll look at that and say, like, okay, we need fundraising, because they may say we need to do a capital campaign. So we need somebody to go out and raise us, $3 billion over 5 years. They, sometimes they need people that are better at growing research and recruiting faculty. So those types of things. I mean, the big numbers for presidents, right, are your overall ranking, which is really, really dictated lots of factors, but dictated by your quality of students and your quality of faculty, all of your faculty data, your research data, and your fundraising data. And so the thing about a university is if you can get the ranking up, you get the students to be way more elite, you get the fundraising up, and you get the faculty up, you are a god. And I'll give you an example of that, which sort of speaks to probably a little too close to home for some of you here in this community, but Dr. Crow at Arizona State is a legend. A legend. Now, if you're an Arizona State football fan or you're an Arizona State basketball fan, I mean, you are right now throwing tomatoes at my screen for saying that. But Dr. Crow is a freaking legend in the higher education world and has done amazing things that if you told me when I was looking at colleges that Arizona State would be, AAU doing all these amazing things, people would have been like, what? Arizona State's opening a med school. So there was some idiot talking about realignment stuff. And they're like, oh, but Michael Crow's job's on the line. I said, he just got them into the AAU and they're opening a med school.
Good Lord.
I got news for you. They might build like a Statue of Liberty, like the Statue of Crow on that campus. His job is not on the line over their football team. So yeah, those are the big numbers. And now one of the things that helps that, right, is having a great sports and great branding. I mean, what Alabama has done to build their school off this image of being the best in football is great. What Georgia's doing, I mean, the brand of Georgia, the brand of the University of Georgia again, you were always a great school, right? Like you're a great flagship school. But what I think that this football team has done to your brand has just been phenomenal. And one of the things too is when you look at it, like for schools that are really looking like, should we make the investment in sports? Like, look at UConn, for example, where they're sort of saying, okay, we want to be in, we're going to double down, we're going to pay the way to be double down. The thing about Georgia is you're already there. So if you're there, it's good to be number one, and you guys are up there as you're literally number one. I mean, have they stopped scoring on TCU yet? What is it? It's 10,000-3 or whatever the score would be now.
It might as well be.
Might as well be. So let's look at athletic department. You guys have an awesome athletic department. So like we said, you got some of the highest NACTA points in the country, 1730. One of the things a little surprising to me, you've only have 4. Are they all football? I'd have to check. What we call the Big 3 national championships. So football, basketball, baseball, you've got 4. I think they're all football, aren't they?
Yeah.
You might have
1942, 80 in the last 2 years.
Okay, so they're all football. You got 31 overall national championships, 70 Olympic medals. That's pretty good. 17 different sports teams by the NCAA's measurements. So that's kind of middle. Your athletic department isn't that big. They run about $160 million budget. You are one of the biggest spenders on football at $61 million. Basketball, you're a big spender on basketball, surprisingly, at $14 million. Your Olympic sports have a $27 million budget. And then we do this walk-on estimate. So, how important are walk-ons financially add to the athletic department? Your school's not as very expensive, so it does not a huge number here, but 17 million. But one of the big numbers here is we do an estimate of profitability to take a look at your school's financials and estimate what's the profitability that football and basketball are throwing off to support the rest of the whole athletic department. And you're a big number on that. Well, as are a lot of the SEC schools. But you're a big number at $101 million. That's a lot of money. So that's good. College World Series appearances, you've had 6. You've been to 1 Final Four, and you had not a very good basketball. You had actually, it looks like a pretty bad basketball decade, which you spend a lot in basketball. So I guess we'll defer to the voice of college basketball to sort that out. Again, SEC schools, pretty big, but not huge. Ivy League and the Big Ten and the ACC and the Pac-12 tend to be a little bit bigger with more sports. However, SEC schools spend the most per athlete. So you guys spend a lot. One of the things about the SEC, your athletic departments are so successful that they are many of them are actually profitable. If you take out, so we adjust for the school subsidy. Most of them are not receiving subsidies from the school. That is rare. So the SEC is in rarefied financial air. Life is good for the SEC, and with your new TV contracts, life is about to get even better. So this is earned revenue for your athletic department, and the amount of revenue they're actually earning, and then we add to that the average school subsidy, and you see that it's actually like pretty tiny. And you guys are averaging 3 million. Average Big 12 schools averaging 17 million. Mountain West are 24. Americans are 25. These schools are subsidizing millions and millions and millions of dollars in the athletic department. You guys don't have to do that because the SEC makes money. Athletic department average budgets. This includes walk-ons. Like we said, it's not a big deal for you guys. Are big. Olympic sports budgets. Georgia, one of the smaller in the SEC. You're the third smallest in the SEC, but you're still big at 27 million. Baseball. So, Georgia we love baseball here. You're one of the top 35 biggest baseball budgets. So that's pretty solid. And then, like we said, all sports success. You guys are really good, kind of right there in the middle of the SEC. The SEC schools all do really well in this because you guys really devote the resources to winning. And then, like we said, cash flow profitability, SEC is the most profitable of all of them. And you see you guys there. This is the top 30 most profitable. Again, this is an estimate we do. But of the top 30 most profitable programs, you are like what, number 6 or something like that? 7. Can't really count. Hard to beat that.
Tony, just to clarify on the national championship. So officially Georgia, according to the Associated Press, of course, the last 2 football seasons, and then 1980, they won. Thank you, K-Dog. I just verified the 1990 College World Series in baseball.
Oh, that was the other one.
The 1942 national championship is one that is given to Georgia by a number of services, but not the major poll.
Okay, so it's baseball. Who is that K-Dog that had baseball? Sorry about that, K-Dog. I should have had that down in there. On this screen, I can't always see all my notes to be able to know exactly. Okay, so you had the one baseball one. One thing here, kind of interesting, recruiting expenses. So this is looking at men's recruiting. You guys are the biggest spenders in all of major football and recruiting. So and that shows in the great job you guys do recruiting. So good ROI. I guess, I find no way to criticize Georgia's spending of that. Because again, one of the things about Georgia, and this is true about a lot of the SEC guys, there's a lot of people that can question the enormous financial spend on sports in the SEC. And there's people that will have a lot of issues with that. They'll say this is an astronomical amount of money, but like you're paying for it. The students aren't paying for it. It's not subsidized. So I'll tell you, you'll never hear me complain about the money that the SEC is spending on sports because they're paying for it. Look, there's some schools in the American that maybe really need to think about what they're doing. Why are they pumping $25 million, $30 million of student academic money into the athletic department? They're not going to get promoted out of the American? Like, why are they spending that kind of money? But the SEC, it's not student money. It's not academic money. They're generating it, they're spending it, and they love it. So
yeah, Tony, that hits me every time we go through that the American seems to be on their own island, where the MAC, for example, in some of those conferences, the MAC would be maybe the best example because it's been a very stable league, while Conference USA and the Sun Belt have been very fluid in regards to membership. They're not spending much. They're not making much. They kind of know who they are and they know what sports means to their universities. And then obviously the Power Five conferences are making tons of money, and then they're putting it right back in. And certainly there are outliers to a certain extent. But yes, the American is the one that stands out as being, wow, you are really all in and pouring tons of money into athletics, but the return is not there. They have had their certain high moments and certain football programs. Obviously, the American has produced, the best football programs. I would have said the Mountain West, a decade ago with Boise State, Fresno State, San Diego State, still doing an outstanding job. But the American has had those pushes by Houston and UCF and Cincinnati most recently. But from a financial standpoint, it's not paying off.
Yeah, and it's not gonna pay off is the thing.
Yeah,
now,
especially with their finest schools leaving from their finest football schools leaving.
Now, and you need to sort of dig into that, right? So, like, what are they spending in it? Because one of the things, I mean, you take a look at the MAC schools, right? The MAC schools run on big subsidies, but one of the things that those schools really do is they are like choosing to have the athletic department. One of the other things, by the way, too, in some of these places, guys, one of the reasons I like to look at that walk-on number is that in some sports, there's a sort of a secret piece in that the walk-ons actually pay for the team. Right. So if you think about like a baseball team will have 40 guys on it or something. Has 11 scholarships. You got 29 or whatever guys that are paying tuition to be on the baseball team. And depending on the school, that a lot of times covers the cost of the baseball team. Depending on what the school and tuition and stuff like that, particularly at private schools. So like a division, and you see this a lot more in the Division II and Division III level, the athletic department is paying for itself. And are using the athletes like it's a recruiting thing. Like you want to get like the star baseball player who's a good student, and so you recruit him because you want him to be a student at your school. And so there's a lot of other elements of that in the lesser divisions. But I mean, you also see that in these leagues, right? Like you guys are going at Georgia. I think Georgia gymnastics is really big, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So like you guys want like girls that are on the Olympic gymnastics team. Like you want those Olympic so you're spending that money, but you're spending that money because you want to have those athletes. And it's not just in football. It's kind of across the board. And Georgia does it, and Georgia succeeds at it, and Georgia makes enough money to pay for it. And in fact, made extra money that they gave back to the school last year. So glory to old Georgia. No complaints from me.
There have been some just football only recruiting numbers released recently that I know you're aware of. And yes, the Georgia gap over everybody else is just there's a sizable gap from a percentage standpoint.
I mean, do you land in helicopters? I don't know what you spend it on, but you know what? Again, it's your money, your profitability, so go for it. I will say one of the other things, quite honestly, I don't know, Georgia fans could probably be mad at me for saying this, but because you spend very lavishly, there's an opportunity that if for whatever reason things are not as glorious in the future, and they're going to be glorious, and the SEC is making a ton more money and all that, but it kind of gives you the opportunity to cut money if you needed to cut some spending, or spend other money on something else, or something like that. As the business shifts, there's the phrase, "the rising tide floats all boats." Georgia is floating at high tide. Life is good. So there's a little flexibility in there, given your astronomical spending. So I think that's a good thing. Again, these are all good problems. These are all the opposite of the Americans' problems. So we give you guys credit for that. All right, should we look at football?
I think Georgia fans, I think you've been waiting for everything's been great up until now, but now it's just astronomical.
Yeah, now it's just astronomical. So obviously right now Georgia is the number one best program in the country. I don't think is there any question about that, Mark, right now?
No.
Yeah, in fact, people kind of glare at me because I usually sort of resent the people who say, well, you're number one until you're not. Like I find that a tired cliche. But given the Georgia team, given the Georgia schedule, given what Georgia's done for the past couple of years, like I don't get an AP vote, but if I did, you'd be number one.
It's like the term defending, Tony. You will know that it doesn't apply here. It's not a boxing analogy. You don't defend your national championship. That one was already won. It's not going to be lost, but I use it at times just to clarify that they are the two-time defending, meaning they've won the two most recent national championships, but that's not used in its proper context. You cannot,
and they keep getting better.
Championship. Yes.
They keep getting better. So like, what are we going to do? Like, again, you scored 100,000. Weren't they eating chicken wings during the national championship game? I mean, that was awesome. That's all. You're eating chicken wings in that. Okay. Anyway, so just again, we're not. There's little to criticize here at Georgia football. Historically though, this is a high point, I would say, for Georgia. Like this is the high point of Georgia. You guys have you won the national championship in 1980. Like, but you've been great. But right now you're exceptional. So there's a little bit of historical stuff I think that's coming down to earth here. So we just kind of look at where you guys stand from history. But I just want to like point out that like right now Georgia is absolutely number one. There's no doubt.
Yes, so, Tony. If we were doing this 2 years ago, it wouldn't really be that different of a look from a reasonable standpoint. Georgia was still at the pinnacle, but they just had not pushed through the door. So you know what the gold medal mentality is of most American society. Well, if you're not number one, you're trash. And, we would be seeing a litany, because I witnessed it for years and years and years, of Georgia jokes, because they had not won a national championship for 41 years, even though they were showing on the field that they were the elite of the elite and right there just behind Alabama, right there in the Ohio State Clemson range. But because, again, of gold medal mentality, that's what I call it, the jokes would be ensuing. But that's not the case. It's 2 years later.
It's 2 years later, and we may be in the same place 2 years from now.
Yeah.
I don't know. They're still scoring. And again, this isn't really on what we're talking about here. But, I also give Georgia credit because one of the things, and again, as a USC alum, I've been on those wonderful rides of gloriousness, and it is really, really hard to sustain that. And so, when we look at Georgia and when they struggled against Kent State and they struggled against Mizzou, that happens. But then you score 100,000 points in the national championship game, and you get you get the mulligan. All right, so let's look at where you guys are. So Kyle Umlong, he's an awesome Texas fan. He's a podcaster, does a really cool thing he calls the Blue Blood Rank. A lot of really, really interesting calculations. I love it because it has so many different factors. You guys are number 11. Again, outstanding. But, again, in sort of compared to everyone else throughout history, you're not quite on the Notre Dame, Alabama history, but you're better than I am now. Winsipedia has you 9th in their multi-factor rating. So, again, these are great things. You only have 3 national championships. So, not as many, but 2 in the last. And these are the credited by the NCAA as consensus ones. So everyone gets a little grumpy. They're kind of low. I like the Mark Rogers numbers, but these are just the NCAA numbers because they were in my database. You've had 2 Heisman trophies, 37 weeks at number 1. That may have been updated since then. 645 weeks all-time ranked. Again, those are really elite, but not mega elite. But then take a look at this. Since 2000, there's a big dark green box there. So, since 2000, you guys have hit it out of the park. You've had 307 weeks ranked. And, take a look next to you, the 2 red boxes of Tennessee and Texas A&M. You guys have the TV numbers. Your TV numbers are big. And your TV numbers are big because there's 3 numbers. You guys probably heard me say this before. We built a model that actually can forecast with 87.5% accuracy TV rankings based on, or TV viewing numbers based on 3 pieces of information. So know that when you guys hear people talk about TV numbers, there's 3 pieces of information that matters and everything else is bunk. The first one is the channel that it's on. So 65% of the viewers is because of the channel that it's on, right? So, think about it. Are you on that CBS in the middle of the afternoon, or, ABC primetime, or are you buried on FS1 or the SEC network or whatever? Georgia, because you're been so good for the past forever, you're on major channels, so millions of people watch. The second piece is the rank of the teams. Well, you've been number 1, so yeah, and close to it, in your top 10. So you guys have huge rankings. And then the last piece is an element of the history of the program. And again, you're number 9, number 11. So Georgia's always going to have great TV ratings. So that's a credit to Georgia. But it's why I don't think it's particularly interesting, because you're the number 1 team in the country and people watch you.
That rankings piece, Tony, certainly hit home for me. I did a series a couple months ago where I looked at the 2022 television rankings and tried to size it up from so many different angles. But it brings to light somebody like me. I will watch 2 unranked teams if they're just on, let's say they're on the cusp of being ranked. They're both 6-2, 6-3. They're really good teams. I know it's going to be a competitive game, but you're right. People tend to watch an Ohio State or a Georgia blow somebody out. They just watch those games.
And those games are on a major channel.
Yeah.
Like the Georgia, I don't know, let's pick who stinks. Georgia Vanderbilt is still going to be on a decent channel.
That Georgia Tech game on Rivalry Weekend it's typically an ABC noon game.
Yeah. It's a big game, and Georgia, no matter, even when Georgia Tech is brutal, and so that, again, one of the reasons your TV numbers are great, because you're number 1. I mean, I always tell people that, one of the things we think that like fans matter, because I've done the fan base study, and we've done all kinds of like that. It's not your fans that matter; it's whether you're relevant to Great Aunt Lulu. That your uncle that sort of like turns on the game and falls asleep and snores. Like those are people watching TV across the country, and that matters more than the fans. And so when you're a great team and you're playing on a major channel, people watch, and you're Georgia and you're on the channel, so you your TV numbers should blow everybody out of the water, and they kind of do.
I don't think I'm mistaken in saying this, and if I am, it's like 1 or 2 times out of 30 years since the SEC championship game was established. And then, of course, it was the first, and others came on board, the Big 12, just 5 years later, and then so forth on down the line. The SEC championship game has been the number 1 rated conference championship game every year. And, of course, Georgia has played in a ton of them. From a regular season standpoint, this Georgia-Tennessee game, in which they were both undefeated at the time, that I believe it was either the 2nd or 3rd highest rated game of the season.
Yeah, Michigan Ohio State's number 1, I think.
That was number 1 by far. And then it was either Alabama-Tennessee or it was the Georgia-Tennessee game was number 2.
One of those big ones. Yeah. And that's because you are a elite big brand who's number 1 or number 2 or your top 10 in the country, and you have that history. So those factors come together, and that's why people watch TV. So one of the things you guys will see when I put out TV data stuff, you'll see I often do them on like a slide with 4 blocks, because first of all, the biggest difference is channel, right? Because I think it's dumb to look at the average. Oh, what's your average TV viewing? Well, that depends on what channel you're on. Because if you're on ESPN2, you can only really compare ESPN2 with FS1 and ESPN, those kind of channels. You can't compare it with CBS at 3:30 in the afternoon. Because, and there's always chicken or the egg with that, right? Because, so CBS is not going to put Austin P versus Vanderbilt. So CBS is putting they've always put the major SEC game on. So again, it's chicken or the egg. But if if you are on ESPN because Alabama's on CBS, that game is going to have many fewer viewers. What is this? Larry Pilgrim. Larry, thank you for helping support the channel. We appreciate it. He says, don't tell Big 12 fans their exposure. Yeah, that is going to be an issue. They have a lot of streaming games. I'll tell you, and some people think the Pac-12 is going to have a lot of games on ESPN. ESPN is paying a fortune to the SEC, and they have those ACC games. So they have a lot of inventory, but they also have a lot of really big games. And the great thing about the SEC, at least, is you have the SEC network, right? So if you're Vanderbilt, you're going to be on the SEC network, which a lot of people get, and so you won't have to be on ESPN Plus. So for the SEC, having the SEC network, I think, is a big advantage. And the other great thing about the SEC network, unlike the Pac-12 network, is it's not really a network. It's just another ESPN channel. The problem that the Pac-12 had is they got greedy and they wanted to be the Mets of the Yankees and own their own network. And the problem is when you own your own network, people are not inclined to distribute it for you, which is why they got in the problem they're in. We could go on forever about that. But yeah, so football wise, you are literally the number one right now. So national championship winners. So this is 1950 to present. The SEC, and I forgot to add. I just made a whole new thing on realignment national championships. They just put it on Twitter today. Yeah, if you guys want, take a look. I'm not Twitter farming here. You can follow me or not. Would love to engage with you, but you don't have to if you don't want. I just put actually a whole thing on Twitter today about the impact of realignment and national championships. And the SEC is number 2 all time, or excuse me, number 3 all time. And you are 2 national championships away from passing the Ivy League. So right now, the Big Ten has the most national championships of anyone. Then the Ivy League, and then the SEC has 2 more. And I have a sneaky suspicion that the SEC will pass the Ivy League before the Ivy League catches the Big Ten. Call it a hunch.
Going out on a limb.
Alabama is only 2 behind Yale. So Yale is still number 1. What do you guys think? Is Alabama going to get 2 more before Yale gets another one? I bet, yeah. So anyway,
those are the current trends. Yes,
those are the current.
It's pretty clear. We had to it took us a while to really, size it up, but yeah.
After in-depth data analysis, we think Alabama is going to pass Yale. Although just our luck, Alabama might take another 40-year break. Who knows? But one of the things that I think is interesting here, and this kind of gets away from Georgia, but I do want to point it out, is, for all the talk about the Power 2, the ACC is definitely number 3. There's not, and all of these data analysis that I've taken a look at here as far as the athletic success, the ACC is number 3. There's no question. And the other two can duke it out. They're kind of the Pac-10, and that's the Pac-10, not the Pac-12. I should have put the 10. I've started, by the way, I think I started using the 10 on the graphics just so that people understand that we're talking about the 10, not the 12. But yeah, the Pac-10 and the Big 12 are very similar in a lot in athletic metrics. Now, in academic metrics, they couldn't be much more different. But in athletic metrics, the Pac-10 and the Big 12 are very similar. But the ACC is head and shoulders above them, and then we get to the Big 10 and the SEC.
And to clarify, unless I'm missing this, Tony, that's with the legacies and the histories of USC, UCLA going to the Big Ten, Oklahoma, Texas going to the SEC, and
Syracuse and Miami going to the ACC. Syracuse and Miami and Pitt. Pitt was in the ECAC, semi-independent, whatever. Now they're in the ACC. So
regardless of where those championships were earned, they are traveling. Yes,
and I think that's okay because we think about things with a forward-looking lens. Again, when we write a history book, we write history books, but we want to think about things with a forward-looking lens. Where are the programs that have won the championships? And that's why, like, I think it's okay to put the stuff the SEC. I'll tell you another thing. And this has to do with something that the SEC is taking a lot of flack for that I think is very interesting. And I think it's okay. So those of you guys, particularly from the SEC, as Texas and Texas A&M or Texas and Oklahoma come in, one of the things that the SEC has done, I hope the Big Ten does this too, is they've sort of embraced the history of the schools even before they were conference members. And I'm going to use a really silly analogy here of like mixed families after divorces. You know, that like you celebrate the birthdays and whatever. And even though you weren't there for the birth, like whatever, you still celebrate the birthday. You know, it's a little bit awkward, but you just roll with it because you're one big family now. And so that's kind of how I look at this. Is just my Tony opinion. You're free to disagree. But when I look at how do we look at data? How do we look at history? How do we adopt the stuff going forward? You know, it happened in the Big 8. It happened in the Southwest Conference. It happened in the Big 12. Whatever. They're in the SEC now. They're part of the family. And just as we celebrate the history of Alabama and the history of Georgia, I think you need to celebrate the history of Texas and Oklahoma.
And we see that from a programming standpoint on the SEC network, on ESPN, on the Big Ten network. You know, they just don't say, oh, Nebraska's been lousy since they've been in the Big Ten, so we're not devoting any documentaries to Nebraska's sports legacy. No, they relive the games of the past, build documentary series on those schools and their traditions. Absolutely.
And I would say, again, think about it as a step family. Like, don't think about it as like stealing the history of the other conference. Like, think about it as the step family. And you know what? If the other conference wants to do a documentary that show, you know, if the Big 12 wants to do a documentary that celebrates Vince Young, that's the thing about a step family. The Big 12 can celebrate Vince Young. The SEC can celebrate Vince Young. Heck, the old Southwest Conference can celebrate Vince Young. Let everybody say, except for those of us Trojans, we do not celebrate Vince Young.
Yeah.
He was down.
I wondered why you went that direction.
I'll just tease. We're using SEC examples here, but that's just my little like side up on. I'll get off my soapbox, but I think it's okay for you guys in the SEC, particularly Georgia. You know, as you guys welcome them in, you know they're part of the family. They're the stepbrothers, and they're part of the family now. So that's my little rant there. But taking a look here, this is kind of interesting. So this is just national championships, 1985 to present. You see it really starts to consolidate, and there are not a lot of teams that have won a national championship. And most of them are in the SEC. So since 1985, half the championships have been in the SEC. By the way, there's an old reason that this is from 1985. We're combining some slides from some other things. It's not a slight on anyone.
Tony, if we went if we just moved that up 6 years and went post 1991, they would all be in the three. Yeah.
Yeah. It'd all be in the three. And you'd actually lose Notre Dame too.
Yeah, exactly.
In this chart, Notre Dame, in the other chart, Notre Dame is in the ACC. Again, sorry guys, these were something different. In this one, they were shown as independent. Yeah, you lose Notre Dame and you lose Colorado and you lose Washington. So yeah, if we did it like 92 or 95, whatever, wherever we could keep Florida, I think we'd lose anybody else. We lose Penn State too. We went into the 90s.
Yes.
So we'd lose Penn State, Washington, Colorado, Notre Dame. We went into the 90s. Nobody else, I think. Everybody else is still relevant.
Yes.
So, yeah, I mean, some of us don't think Nebraska should get 97, but that's because I'm a Michigan native. Okay.
Little programming note before, Tony, you continue. 1997, Tony brings up Michigan, Nebraska. So May was Great Debate Month. And as all great promoters and companies that try to build a brand do, of course, it starts out within a particular, Monday Night Football went to Thursday night. It went to Sunday night. Well, Great Debate Month of May is continuing onward. So our Great Debate Month continues on Friday night, 1997, Michigan, Nebraska, Great Debate.
Oh, Oh, I'm going to be in the chat for that.
So we're
And
here Friday
I'm gonna
at
wear
10
blue.
p.m. Eastern time. On the
You know, I was
Michigan
in the
and
Rose
Nebraska
Bowl for that
channels.
game.
Nice. Okay.
I was in the Rose Bowl for that game, and then this wild sort of situation. My friend and I had to find a place to stay in LA, so we broke into my dorm because we weren't supposed to be in the dorm, and then we blacked out all the windows, and we watched that Nebraska game in my college dorm with the windows blacked out.
That's great.
And I watched Scott Frost say,
Yeah.
"How can you deny Tom Osborne?" And we were like, really easily. Actually, it's very easy to deny Tom Osborne and Scott Frost. I still hold that against him. So this is all-time weeks ranked in the AP poll. I mean, again, like we said, Georgia, one of the best programs in history. You blow pretty much everybody out of the water. You blow out of the water the entire Pac-12, the entire Big 12, most of the SEC. All in the Big 10, the only people better than you are what? Penn State, Nebraska, USC, Michigan, Ohio State. In the ACC, the only one better than you is Notre Dame. And in your conference, the only ones higher than you are LSU, Texas, Alabama, Oklahoma. Oklahoma is now number 1 in the Big 12 in this. Speaking of the Step family. So that is a deep dive into Georgia.
Love it, Tony. Love it. And you know that I can't wait to tear into that television model, the ratings model.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Anytime when you want, we can do that. Yeah, because it's 87% and I've done some other stuff. We can get it a little bit higher, but one of the things I really liked about the simplicity is that we were able to get it to about 87% with 3 easy inputs, which is pretty cool. Just because you can sort of see, you know, the numbers are a TV product. And thank you, K-Dog. I appreciate the kind words. Appreciate that. Thanks, K-Dog. It's a TV product. It's not a fan product. Somebody brought up the other day, and this is sort of off subject, or today actually, I was talking to somebody on Twitter. They tagged me, someone was asking me a question about Fresno State, right? Because Fresno State has terrible TV viewership, but they fill their stadium. And I kind of use the example like Fresno State versus Stanford. Like, you know, Stanford, Christian McCaffrey was famous once for coming back from a game, and his roommate said, "Oh, where have you been?" And Christian McCaffrey was like, "Are you serious?" Because he had just come back from a game. So they're kind of the opposite. But Stanford's a great TV product. There's going to be nobody in the stands, but they're a great TV product. People watch. So that, again, because your TV it's the channel that you're on. It's the relevancy. You know, are you ranked? And the brand. You know, what's your history been? And so if you're a team and you want people to watch you, if you win, you get ranked, you get on channels, people will watch you. So.
All right, folks, we'll give you a few seconds, kind of going once, going twice. Any final comments you would like to pass along? Any final questions for Tony?
Thank you to Dependent Fanatic. We appreciate that. Yeah, Georgia's a great school. All the SEC. Because one of the things, by the way, and we probably said this earlier, just in case we didn't, all of the Power 5 schools are great schools. All of them. They're all great. There's no bad school in the Power 5. There's really no bad school in FBS. Because really, in order to have the resources that you need to put into major FBS football, you got to be a great school to have that kind of resources. So anyway, that's my take. Thank you guys for all your nice words. Appreciate it. It's good to have you guys. Good to have you guys in the chat. And it's been a big day. Truck Stop Gumby will be interested to see your new chancellor.
So tell us about that, Tony, for those of us that don't keep track of such things.
Super big deal. Dr. Chris, really, really brilliant lady, really neat lady, announced her retirement at the end of next year. So a year from now, retiring as chancellor of the University of California at Berkeley, which is, if you guys don't know it, so we in our college sports world, right? We look at Berkeley and we see like a bad football team and an atrocious basketball team and a horrific baseball team. And we sort of like laugh. But like Berkeley is a ridiculous institution. Unreal. I hate their teams, right? I laugh when they lose. I cheer for whoever's playing against them. But it's a pretty great school. I'd hire their students in a minute. I mean, Berkeley, look at the periodic table of elements, and you'll notice Berkelium and Californium right next to each other on the periodic table. Not an accident. And so, I mean, this is one of the top 10, at worst, top 20 jobs in academia. So who comes in as president is going to be big, or chancellor is going to be big, because that's going to be big for the history of the PAC. I mean, the presidents and chancellors of the University of California who created the PCC and then created the PAC later. If everybody else is like a little rowboat and they're an aircraft carrier. So it's a ridiculous institution. Yeah, Cal is a superpower. Exactly, T-Mac. And so who gets that job? I hope it's somebody who really, and Dr. Chris has done a lot to try to help their athletic department. And they've won 5 national championships this year in different sports. It hasn't worked out for football and basketball. It's just been bad. But like, they're doing the right things, right? It's like somebody who followed the recipe, but like the cake didn't bake. And that's the problem that Cal's had. So I really hope that they get somebody really great. She's really neat, but I hope that whoever they get is somebody who can really just put them back into being the heavyweight that they are. Because I love to hate them. And so it's fun when like we have that 4th and 10 with Aaron Rodgers. If you remember that game?
I do.
Yeah, like those games are great and I love to beat them.
When your point is you love to see your rival down, but when they're just down and out year after year, it's time to, we want this to be fun again. Yeah.
Yeah, we want to hate you. Exactly.
We want to pity you.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, I'll tell you a really funny story. One last thing is, side piece on this. No, Cal has outstanding facilities. Cal just spent like $1 billion, $500 million to rebuild Memorial Stadium in pieces. So I don't know if you guys know this. Memorial Stadium is on a fault line. The Hayward Fault goes under the field. And so the stadium is in multiple pieces that shift on each other in an earthquake. The whole stadium moves in an earthquake. It's wild. And it's why they have $400 million of athletic debt. Because they have a beautiful historic stadium that shifts in pieces of an earthquake, like Frank Lloyd Wright's Imperial Hotel. They actually have great facilities. Hospitalion's really nice. Again, it's just not working for them, and I hope it does, so they can get it back together. But yeah, USC's nickname. USC was the Fighting Methodists, and they wanted a new nickname. And there was a track meet against Berkeley. And again, that was USC was like this fledgling school from the dirty, dusty southern part of the state. It was before LA grew up. And they went and they were supposed to get smoked. This was 1912, supposed to get smoked in track by Cal. And it came down to the very last relay, and Cal just barely won. And Owen Bird from the LA Times wrote, "The Methodists fought like valiant Trojans." And that's where the mascot came from. Wow. So anyway, sorry, Georgia.
We learned from you, Tony. No, the reason I know that story is because you've told it before, and I've committed it to memory. Yes,
there you go.
It's made me smarter. This entire presentation makes me just a little bit smarter every time. Everyone, if you enjoyed this deep dive, Tony has presented this same delivery for Michigan, Florida State, USC, Miami, and Notre Dame. Check out those presentations on those channels. He's going to continue through the car wash the rest of the summer for the rest of our Power 5 channels and teams that we cover here at the Voice of College Football. Also, with the SEC unveiling its new schedule for 2024, I will take a deep dive of sorts on the scheduling.
Some good games in that.
The analysis, yes, it's insane, the matchups there. So we will do that here soon, folks, and I will do that for each team in the SEC. I will do that for each team in the Big Ten. I'm a little bit behind. I took 2 long extended weekends of vacation, so bear with me. We've got a lot of content to present to all of you before we really take a focused approach on about a month from now. Focused approach on the 2023 season coming up. And again, 1997 is in view. Friday night, 10 o'clock Eastern time, Nebraska, Michigan. Who would have won? Who deserves the national championship? And I can't wait to hear from all of you. Tony, it's been amazing.
Fight on. We'll see you soon.
We appreciate it. Thank you so much. Again, everyone, 10 o'clock Eastern time, Nebraska, Michigan on Friday night. We will see you then. And again, I'm going to get to as much as I possibly can in regards to content coming up. And I really need to hit my scheduling analysis, even though we did a deep dive on the SEC reveal for 2024. We did that live last night. Check that out. That was a fun conversation with a lot of great phone calls. But I'm going to do a more focused analysis on each team in the SEC and what that 2024 schedule means for each individual school. Same thing with the Big Ten. And hey, if you love history as well, we're marching through the national championships, going back through the decades. We have gone through the playoff era. So check it out. Just posted today. 2014, the beginning of the playoff era through 17. We did the block of 2018 through 22, reassigning national championships. Do you think I really reassigned any national championships during the playoff era? I did give you some things to think about regarding maybe some teams with resumes that were left out of the playoff. That series will get more interesting, more complicated, more intriguing as we march back in time through the BCS era and through the poll era, of course. So keep it locked in here at the Voice of College
Hold
Football.
on, can we talk about 2008? And when we do that,
we will talk about 2008. People talk about, as you know, 2007.
Okay, sorry, I just had to chime in for that one.
That's you chime in anytime, Tony. As you know, college football fans love to go to 2007 because that was a chaotic year. But 2008 is undervalued in regards to it's just a foregone conclusion to a lot of college football fans that whatever the BCS formula says, that must be the conclusion of the season in regards to the two worthy teams to play for a national championship. We challenge all of you to think. We like to think here at the Voice of College Football. Let's look at the resumes. Let's look at the performance and review the seasons to see who rightfully earned those positions. And I will tell you that rarely do I take away from the accomplishments of the teams that, in the eyes of pollsters, earned national championships. Yeah, that would have been an amazing game. It certainly would.
I knew I liked you, K-Dog. I knew I liked you.
And Tony, a lot of people won't like this, but some of these years get kind of messy.
Oh,
but
yeah.
It's not as clear as the pollsters and the BCS formula would make you think.
No, it was never as clear. And you know, one of the things, and this is just a side thing, is a friend of mine says, my friend Chris, who's a huge Michigan fan. I don't know if he's watching. If you are, Chris, go blue. He always says, and he said this when we went to the BCS, and then after when we went to the playoff. And I think, you know, this sort of ties a little bit to Michigan in '97 for your debate. Chris said, it's far better to argue about why you should be the champion than to know for sure that you're not. And so one of the elements of those crazy kind of fun argument years, right, is when you're like, oh, well, they should be number one, they should be number one, versus like poor TCU this year. Like, they're not. So yeah, that's one of those little side things that, you know, I always give a little bit of good kudos there, but yeah, those will be fun debates. I can't wait.
And I don't take on the role if anyone expects this of me, and many people do, and they request me to make a kind of in the future prediction based, obviously we will never truly know who would win games, but they want me to say, oh, well, this team would have beaten this team. I'm not doing that. I am reviewing resumes, analyzing resumes to say the AP and the coaches poll told us this, but what about this team? What about that team? What about this team? They had a resume that qualifies them for national championship consideration.
Yeah, and that's what makes it fun. Like, and I mean, I think it's gonna change, you know, a little bit when we get to the new 12-team playoff. And that's gonna be better because everyone's gonna be a part of it. Right. But we are going to lose that element of, you know, waking up in the morning and finding that those doggone voters gave it to Tom Osborne when it belonged to Michigan. So we'll see.
What I also think is funny in talking to fans And there's nothing wrong with this, but in looking at yesteryear, they tend to treat bowl games as playoff games, like they were eliminators. Well, they were
Yeah.
extremely important games that matched two of the top teams to give you that slice of a national championship. But they're not playoff games. They
No.
are just a data point in determining, in my view at least, a national champion.
Well, and I'll give you an example of that, actually. One of my dad's national championships, they lost the bowl game. They won the national championship. The bowl game was like, it was an after the season, like an exhibition thing. And the funny thing is they beat UCLA at Spartan Stadium during the season, and then went to they won the national championship, and then went to the Rose Bowl and lost to UCLA.
1965, correct?
Yeah. So it was, one of those things where you just sort of look at it, and it's a different era, and so we have to remember that those eras were different.
Absolutely. All right, Tony. Thank you so much.
All right, we'll see you soon.
Being here already.
Bye-bye.
Okay, everyone. Friday night, 10 o'clock Eastern time, Michigan, Nebraska. In the meantime, enjoy the content. We will see you soon. If you have any requests, hit me up with those requests. But believe me, my docket is full. My to-do list is full, and you will enjoy the content. We will see you soon. Friday night, 10 p.m. Eastern time.